Today is Friday, August 4th, and we're going around the bases with our MLB insider at the New York Post, John Heyman. John, are you recovered? How's it going since post deadline now?
All good. We're a few days out. Appreciate it, Ryan.
Yeah, so we're obviously doing our little postmortem deadline show here, and I wanted to talk about a couple things. The first thing we're going to talk about is the New York Mets and what the clear direction they were going in. There was the conversation we had on our last episode last Friday about, the Mets had already sold David Robertson. Who else will be next? Would they trade Justin Verlander and Max Scherzer? It turns out the Mets sold everyone and then some. They sold Pham, they sold Canna. So we saw the clear direction for the Mets, right, John, in that they're going for that fire sale and they were trying to rebuild their whole entire farm system. So the thing that was alarming, I think, for a lot of the media and Mets fans was Max Scherzer had some comments that he spoke to Ken Rosenthal, and then he said so in the media as well in his Rangers intro presser, where he said he revealed this conversation with Billy Epler and that the Mets are not going to be as competitive in 2024 and possibly even into 2025 because they are trying to rebuild and restock that farm system. So when you hear those comments, John, are you a little alarmed that Scherzer was willing to reveal that type of information right away?
Well, first of all, let's go over the Mets strategy. I think they had two real options, which was to just play it out, keep Robertson, keep Verlander, keep Scherzer, keep Canna, keep Pham, and go for it. That's what I recommended. That's what I'm used to in New York. I know 14%, 17% chance to make the playoffs is very little. And obviously, after the sale, now they look even worse, losing to the Royals. But that's probably what I would have done. That's the safer bet. The other thing is to hold that sale, as you said, and make it a big sale and include Verlander and Scherzer, not just trade Robertson. Because really, when you trade Robertson, your closer, you're giving up the season at that point. And if you're going to give up the season, you might as well reset and try to restock your farm system. I get that part of it. I wouldn't have done the middle. So I think what they did was right in terms of they had two options and they took the second option, the more difficult one. I think other teams are admiring the fact that they reset when they, obviously made a big play for Scherzer. Verlander didn't work, and they admitted it. So they admire that, and the fact that they got Luis Angel Acuna, they got Gilbert, a very good outfield prospect from Houston, Clifford as well from Houston. They got some good prospects. So yeah, so I think they did well with that. In terms of Scherzer's comments, I'm never going to say anything wrong with revealing something. The fans want to know. This part of my job is to come up with information. Scherzer is very honest, and he revealed what they told him. Now, is it possible they were making it sound worse to get him to convince him to accept the trade? We'll never know that. I don't think they're liars, so I think it was
right.
If not the truth, it was pretty close to the truth. And obviously Steve Cohen has talked since then, and he hasn't suggested the opposite. He said, "I think we'll be competitive," but he basically said, "We're not going to shop with those upper echelon guys necessarily." They obviously going to need pitching, right? And there are a lot of good pitchers even beyond Ohtani. You've got as free agents, you've got Urias, you've got Snell. And there are several other very, very Enola, and they're very, very good ones like Montgomery and probably Eduardo Rodriguez, who, although he's not predictable as to what he's going to do.
Right.
They're not going to bring back Stroman, of course, but it is a good pitching market. The way it was told to Scherzer, according to Scherzer, is that they're not going to play in that market.
Yeah.
The Mets people haven't really denied that. We'll see. All they've said is we think we're going to be competitive. So, I have no problem with him revealing that. His life,
Yeah.
it's his decision. He decided to go, but his life was upended. And I don't think those quotes are inherently off the record. He's told something, and I'm glad that he revealed it, and good for him.
Yeah, I think a lot of Mets fans, at least my friends, they responded actually pretty well to the Scherzer comments because it indicated, like you said, the clear direction of the Mets are trying to reset here, right? And
pretty clear, unless they made it sound a little bit worse to convince him to accept the trade. But yes,
right.
I don't, as I said, I don't think they're liars. I don't think they
right.
lied. I'm of the belief they're not going to go crazy on the free agent market.
Exactly.
Whether they don't play at all I don't know, but I think they will. That is their plan right now, that they will not go crazy. So I think it
Well,
was fine that he revealed that.
yeah, and what's interesting is obviously the Mets were willing to accept a lot of the contract on Scherzer and Verlander in order to get those better prospects in return, which was the unique part of this trade deadline and why
Right.
they were willing to sell off. So obviously the other part that we heard about is Pete Alonso. You know, he is one of those guys who is due a contract extension in a year, and the Mets. You know, I was a little concerned when I heard Steve Cohen's comments yesterday about Alonso or 2 days ago about Alonso saying, asked about, do you want Pete Alonso to be a long-term Met? And he says he's a great Met. That's all he really would say. He wouldn't further comment. And Billy Epler didn't really persuade, I guess, in his comments either that they're going to extend or try to look to extend Alonso long-term. You had wrote about Alonso at the trade deadline and then also possibly in the offseason. So when you're looking at Pete Alonso and the New York Mets, are they going to look to trade him, John?
Well, I think they're going to give it another shot in terms of a long-term deal. I do believe they tried last winter. It didn't really come out, but my impression, reading between the lines, is that he really wasn't, meaning Alonso, really wasn't ready to talk long-term deal. And obviously, the equation now has changed. If they're not going for it next year, and he's only got 1 year to go, I would say there's a chance that they do end up trading him. Now, they did talk at the deadline. It's not easy to make a trade like that at the deadline. Obviously, he's not a rental, and he is a great star. And the price was very high, understandably so. They didn't seem anxious to deal him. But yeah, I don't think you can rule it out at this point, right? I mean, are they really playing for 2024? I mean, they're saying they think they're going to be competitive, and that's nice. But obviously, right now their pitching rotation looks non-competitive, right? Senga's been good. Hopefully Peterson will be better. McGill's got some talent. Quintana will be back another year. I mean, that's not a proven rotation, and that's putting it kindly. So right now they don't look like a contender. They'd have to go for some of those big free agent
Yeah.
pitchers, or at least some good ones, like maybe a Paxton or somebody like that, to really give themselves a good chance to be competitive next year, and which is the last year that Alonso is right now under control for.
Right.
So
And he'll
I,
be
I say they give it a shot. I mean, try to re-sign him, and if it's not to your liking, if you're not getting him at the price that you want, and look, Steve Cohen, we can't criticize him for not spending. He spent a record amount this year. Now he's got all this dead money that he's spending. He's paying for Scherzer and Verlander to go elsewhere, and others, right? Didn't he pay? He paid some of the Canna and Robertson, I think, as well.
Yeah.
So it's, what is it, 100 million in dead money?
Yeah, it
So
is. It's
we
100 million
can't
for
really
prospects.
criticize
It's
him for
crazy. I've
not.
never seen anything like it before.
Well, it's an unusual situation. We have an owner that's worth probably $20 billion or more. And, the other owners, none of the other owners are even worth half that, I don't believe. So, he's certainly got an advantage there. He's able to do things that other owners aren't able to do. He was able to go for it and spend, including the tax, close to $500 million. Now that's going to come down this year
Yeah.
with some of the trades a little bit. And he's able to have, another 100 million now in dead money, which other owners wouldn't go for. I mean, the Padre owner is close. He's spending a lot
Yeah.
with less revenue, but not to this degree. So it's an advantage, and he's using that advantage, which I think is great.
Yeah. I think one thing that's going to be questioned about this strategy here a little bit with Alonso is that you did pay a guy like Brandon Nimmo and Jeff McNeil this past offseason. And the question could be, why would you not want to pay a guy who's hitting who averages almost 50 home runs a season? He's a decent first baseman defensively, but he's getting better. Could argue he's a clubhouse leader, but there's that question that could come into, if you decide to trade him for a lot of prospects, was that the right move? So I just think that could be something interesting that pops up
I
with
mean,
Alonso's
it's a
situation.
tough one because the
Yeah.
fans love him. Obviously, he's a
Right.
good character and he's a great slugger. But these things are not easy. Even for Steve Cohen, he did bring Nimmo back, right? He did end up signing Verlander, and he signed Scherzer before that. But it doesn't mean you're going to sign everybody. And they
Right.
tried over the winter with Alonso. Of course, Alonso surely saw what the free agents were getting at the time. And, while he loves being a Met, and he certainly says that he loves being a Met, and I believe him, free agency is not so bad. I mean, Judge got 360. I think Judge is in another category,
Right.
but Correa is not in another category, and he was offered 350. If his
Yeah.
medical had come through, he was going to get 350. Turner is not in another category. He got 300, and he was offered 342. I mean, Judge is to me just better than everybody else except for Ohtani, but certainly Alonso's a star, and the fans love him. So it's not going to be easy, but I think they'll give it a try first, and then if it doesn't work, let's not be shocked if they look to trade him.
Wow. That's a lot right there, John. And I know there was a lot with the Mets. They dominated a lot of the storylines, especially here in the local market. But let's try and pivot here and go to the next topic here about the New York Yankees. And they were the exact opposite of the Mets. They didn't do anything at the deadline except trading for a couple middle relievers, if we're being honest. So you wrote about them yesterday, John. It was interesting when you talked about Brian Cashman. There was no clear direction, it felt like, when they head into the deadline. They were on the fence. Would they be a conservative buyer, or would they be selling off rental pieces that are free agents, after the season? Did you have an issue, John, with the Yankees and the fact that they really didn't have a direction and they didn't make a clear, firm step one way or the other? They were one of the teams that really weren't making any moves, and they turned away opportunities earlier in the season. It felt like, where before the Cubs went back into contention, maybe it could have been more aggressive to get a Cody Bellinger.
I don't know. I would push back on that a little bit.
Okay.
Obviously, it's been a terrible season, so I get all the criticism for Brian Cashman in the front office. It has not been anything like what we would have expected. As we do this right now, they're still in last place. It's only a half game behind Boston, but it shouldn't be anywhere near last place with a close to $300 million payroll. Of course, they are doing better than the Mets with a lower payroll. So by that Mets standard, I guess they're doing better. I think Cashman gets over-criticized to me. I mean, he's had a winning record every year since coming in '98. He won 4 titles, and I know they haven't won in a long time. I do, as I wrote in a previous column, I do think they've been in a slump, the front office. Obviously, the Hicks extension was not a good idea. The Severino extension has been a disaster, shockingly so. The trades have not been good. The one with Minnesota, I mean, IKF is a good utility player, but he didn't turn out to be a shortstop, at least not for the Yankees.
Yep.
And Donaldson with that $25 million.
Disaster.
I mean, he's been hurt. He's strikeout prone. He's basically a defensive specialist who's, available, basically half the time. So that was not a good trade. And obviously we know about Gallo and Montas, and they seem to keep trading for injured guys. So a lot of issues there. The deadline, it's hard for me to kill him on the deadline. There's no way. The Cubs were waiting on Bellinger. They were leaning sell, and they were telling teams, we're probably going to sell. But then that doesn't mean you're going to sell at that moment, right? They're not selling. They couldn't have. There's no way they could have gotten Bellinger a few weeks earlier. They were just telling teams, we're probably going to sell, and we'll see at the end. They're going to play it out, because they were within 6-7 games, something like that at that time. Well, they went on a 7-game winning streak. They're only behind Milwaukee and Cincinnati, 2 small market teams. The Cubs have the best run differential in that division. Not only that, 3rd best in the league behind the Braves and the Dodgers. They are a good team. Now, their record wasn't great. They decided once they won 7 in a row, they're going for it. Obviously, at that point, Bellinger's off, but he was never really on. So I don't think that criticism is correct. You could say, why didn't they go for Grichuk? They never made a call there. Teoscar Hernandez was offered to them. They didn't. Cashman and company did not want him, so they could have upgraded there. Would that have solved their problems? I mean, they really needed a left-handed bat who's great, and right now Bellinger's great. So it is upsetting that that's the one guy, but unfortunately, I don't think he was ever out there. So I think the criticism about the deadline is a bit unwarranted. The problem is they're in the middle, so it's hard to be aggressive when you're in the middle. You probably are going to count on Cortez coming back, or Rodon doing better, or Severino doing better. I get that. And Montas will come back eventually. Who knows with him? But I mean, you aren't going to play in that starting pitching market when you're 2 or 3, 4 games over 500, right? You're not going to give up all your good prospects when you're barely on the cusp of the race.
I
They
got
needed
that.
offense. Offense is what they needed. It was a terrible. It was the worst market for offense I've ever seen.
Yeah.
There were
Yeah.
8 or 9 starting pitchers, and there was bullpen pieces, but the only really, I think, impactful guy that was traded was Candelario, and he's a third base rental. I mean, I don't blame them for thinking between IKF, Peraza, and LeMahieu, they can cover third base rather than give up big prospects. When you're in the middle, you're in a tough spot. Look, the Angels were in the middle. They bought. I liked that they did
But
that. Doesn't look good at the moment. Seattle was in the middle. They sold. Now they're winning. Did they do the right thing? You know,
well,
when you're in the middle, you're in a bad spot.
yeah, but
And
here's the
I
thing.
blame
They
them for
didn't
being in the middle. When you spend $300 million or close to it, you shouldn't be in the middle.
but they
That's the
didn't take a
problem.
step either way though, John. Like that's kind of like
Yeah.
I
But
think
what would
the
they have
criticism.
sold? Yeah, the guys
So
they
the
could have
sold were the
sold.
guys you wrote about. You wrote about
Right, right,
Peralta, you wrote
right.
about
Bader,
Bader and
right.
IKF.
IKF and
So
Severino. Well, what
and
do you think Severino's getting at this point?
Severino's not getting anything, but the
Okay,
other guys,
IKF is a utility player at this point for the Yankees. I mean, you're not getting a top prospect back from Peralta's a relief pitcher.
but that's
You're
the
not getting a
realism on the
top
players you
prospect back.
acquired, though. You know what I mean?
Bader, yeah, that's what I'm saying. Obviously, they've been in a slump the last 2 or 3 years. They're not in a great position. That is their own fault. But I don't think they could have gotten a ton. Just like with the Mets, I wouldn't have given up the season, even with a 17% chance over what you could get for Robertson, who was the most marketable guy, who was a rental player who you could trade. I wouldn't have given up the season, and they were like 7 out, right? The Yankees are only like 3 out.
Okay.
Would you give up the season over what you could get
Well,
for
here's the thing.
Peralta? I wouldn't do it.
I don't
Yeah,
think Peralta is giving up the season. If I'm being real, like I don't think Peralta was the issue with the
yeah.
Yankees. Like you said, it was the offense.
Well, their
So
one strength was their bullpen. So to reduce the bullpen, now you're going to get a lesser bullpen with a poor offense, and you're 3 out. You're sending them. I do think sending a message to the club does count as well, and it's not a good message. You're not getting, in my opinion, you're not getting a top prospect who's anywhere near the big leagues for Peralta. Robertson is a closer, an outstanding one, and you got 2 good kids who are teenagers.
yeah,
Right. So what are you getting from Peralta? One kid who's a teenager. You could get something. You could trade him. I get it, and you could save that little bit of money. But if I'm Hal Steinbrenner, I'm not worried about a couple million here or there. I'd rather try to play out the season and win it. But
no, I hear you.
there's some people who will say they should have sold those pieces. If you trade Bader, I mean, their outfield's already a disaster. You trade Bader, then what? You're to me, that's giving up the season. If you're
I
trading
hear you.
Bader, yeah. So
I hear you. So I
Peralta,
mean,
I agree. It's not when giving up the season, but you're not getting anything either. I don't think.
totally understand, and I think, like you said, they put themselves in that situation, being in the
Sure.
middle and not really
Fair.
having a way to step into a direction of a conservative buyer or even a seller. And like you said, it was not a great buyer's, or as you say, not a great buyer's market, right? Like there weren't many pieces out there for
Terrible.
you.
Not
Terrible.
just not great. It was all-time bad. Candelario is the one I would say above average offensive player who was
Impact bat.
traded near the
Yeah.
deadline. Grichuk and Crone are okay, but I could see them. I could see him passing on them, but I don't know.
Yeah.
I would have investigated Grichuk and Teoscar Hernandez.
Yeah.
Probably.
And it's interesting when you hear again, and if we're being honest, the Yankees are a disaster right now. When you think about the Domingo Germán situation, when you think about the Anthony Rizzo situation, it just keeps getting worse and worse with them. So I know we talk about the deadline. That was our focus here. There's
Right.
just so much to unpack with this team. And there's a lot of questions I think fans have about what's going on in this organization in the future,
Yeah.
because you are committed to these veterans that aren't performing well. You're committed to Rizzo, LeMahieu, and Stans.
That's a tough
So
one. I just don't. I'm not a doctor in any sense of the word. I wasn't even particularly good at science. I don't know, but I mean, I was there that day and I saw him stagger, and I thought he had a concussion from watching him stagger after the collision with Tatis Jr. And I know he's very tough, and I know he was out 2 or 3 days, so I knew he was hurting, and he came back. And did he try to convince himself he was doing okay? Because I mean, Judge had just gone out,
Yep.
a few days later, I believe. Did he try to convince himself he could do it? He's a very tough guy, and I don't know. Maybe you don't know who to blame there, but he obviously something was wrong because
Yeah.
he was terrible. I mean, he was worse than LeMahieu, Stanton, and all the
Worst qualified hitter in the last 2 months.
Yeah, but you're right, and that's not him. I mean, it was off to a great start. He has the collision, and now he's terrible. 2 months later, we decided, well, Now he's got a concussion. Like I said, I'm not a doctor. Sometimes these things become more obvious months later. Maybe that's what happened, but yeah, it certainly does not look good.
John, I always appreciate going back and forth with you, man. This is why I enjoy doing this with you. Let's go on to our next thing here. Deadline winners. Who are you deadline winners? Who did well in this deadline?
Right. Well, obviously the Rangers getting Scherzer and the Astros getting Verlander. Verlander looks like he only wanted to go to the Astros. He might have accepted the Dodgers, but it's difficult the last minute, as we saw with Eduardo Rodriguez, to trade him somewhere where he might accept it. He was in that position with the full no trade. Don't begrudge him. He got that right. Scherzer wants to win, so he's traded to a team that's trying to win, and he accepted it. So Texas, I thought Texas was the big winner. Getting Aroldis Chapman early, then they added Stratton from St. Louis. They added Montgomery. They got the backup catcher, which they needed with Heim hurt, and obviously Scherzer, the big one. To me, Texas was the big winner. I do like the Angels going for it. Obviously, over the last few days, it doesn't look like a great idea, but their goal is to keep Shohei Ohtani. If they traded him, that goal is given up. He's not coming back and re-signing at that point. Is he signing now? Is he going to sign with them at the end of the season? We'll see. I know a lot of people around baseball think there's no chance that they keep him, but I still think, Artie Moreno and company, they signed up Mike Trout twice. They signed Pujols, Rendon. They've signed a lot of big time stars. So I'm not going to put it past them. They are going to put a big offer on the table, and they are going to try to keep them. And in their position, I think it was worth going for. Now, obviously, we were over this last week. If they don't keep them, they're not in good shape because they acquired a bunch of rentals, starting with Giolito, Richuk, and the others. So it was a gamble, but I like that gamble. But the two Texas teams, Houston and the Rangers, I think those are the biggest winners for me. I like what the Cubs did. Now they're hot still. Candelario, I think, will help them. And I think they might steal that division.
Yeah. And speaking of all that, the Cubs, let's bring this all home. They play the Reds, beat them up. Is that your most disappointing team of the week?
Yeah, I think that is my most disappointing team of the week. And I get it was difficult for them. They do have a lot of great young players there, so that enables them to make a trade. But, it's hard when you're a small market team to give up these young players. I think there were a few complications. One was that two of the teams that have starting pitchers to sell, St. Louis Cardinals and the Pittsburgh Pirates, they don't want to deal with the Reds. Now, should they have a cozier relationship? I know the Mets makes deals with the Marlins, right? And they have a better relationship. But believe it or not, that NL Central gets pretty nasty. St. Louis and Cincinnati have quite a rivalry, and I just don't think they get along at all. St. Louis had obviously Montgomery and Flaherty, two of the best pitchers that were traded. Pittsburgh had Rich Hill, who I think would have helped Cincinnati, and they were talking about Keller with teams, but I doubt they were talking about him with Cincinnati. The other thing was obviously Scherzer and Verlander, they have full no trades. I can't imagine. And certainly we know with Verlander, he was going to go to Houston or maybe LA. He's not going to Cincinnati. I don't think Scherzer's going to Cincinnati. So what is left? There isn't much. The one guy I think they should have tried, I'm sure they tried, but one guy that made sense would be Michael Lorenzen. He's an original Red. He was with the Tigers, and that was a guy to get. Now, of course, to compete against Dave Dombrowski on the trade market is difficult. Dave Dombrowski is willing to give up prospects, and look, he's gotten 4 teams to the World Series, so can't knock him for being willing to give up prospects. It has certainly worked for him. So the Phillies got Lorenzen. I saw he threw 8 innings last night and was great. That would have been the one guy for the Reds. But with their team right now, their starting pitching is in disarray at this moment, right? Lively just went on the IL after they left him in to give up, I don't know, was it 11 runs or 13 runs? I don't know. I lost count.
Close to
Lodolo and Green could be at the top of the rotation once they come back, but right now they're injured. They're young. I just don't see the innings there for them. But, they got guys in the minors. They got Richardson and Phillips, 2 potential guys. So they have options. But I think like Baltimore, and even to a greater degree, they needed that big-time starting pitcher to give them some innings, and Baltimore ended up getting Flaherty, which, like I said, I don't think Cincinnati was going to get Flaherty. So they had some handicaps in a difficult situation, and it obviously did not work out for the Reds.
It didn't. But John, I appreciate you as always for going around the bases with us and giving us all your insight, man. I know it's a busy week for you, and appreciate you as always, man.
All right, Ryan. Good talking to you.